The groom disappeared at the altar, and the only person who knows where he went is the cleaning lady who carries, hidden in her pocket, the secret capable of destroying a billion-dollar empire. The groom vanishes at the altar, and a delivery girl holds the only thing that could tear an empire apart. Crystal lights hang like frozen stars over the ballroom. Servers weave between marble columns. Guests in silks and tailored suits raise flutes that catch the light. The Chiron crest, 3 interlocking crescents, glows on banners and monogrammed napkins. Cameras from a dozen magazines angle toward the dais where Michael Jones, polished and practiced, prepares to declare a future anyone would envy, a merger, a marriage, and the consolidation of 2 fortunes into a single headline. Lina Harris stands along the service corridor, chest tight beneath the plain jacket of a catering contractor. Her hands are steady by habit. Too many deliveries, too many nights when steady hands were the only currency she had. She should have been invisible tonight, another shadow moving plates and bouquets. Instead, she carries a velvet sachet against her palms, the fabric worn thin where something hard presses at the center. She was supposed to drop it with the floral arrangements and leave, but when the girl in charge ordered her to toss it in the back, wrong address, wrong envelope, Lina kept it, folded once, twice, and then tucked it into the inner seam of her jacket. She does not know why she kept it. Maybe because the fabric reminded her of a blanket from a house she dreamed of having. Maybe because the tag on the sachet was handwritten in a looping, elegant hand that read simply, "For the Chiron table." She steps into the ballroom like a small animal caught between lampposts. The room is a river of sound until 2 things break it: Michael at the center and a low murmur that follows a glinting object when Lina fumbles the sachet from her jacket to tighten a sleeve. The pendant inside catches the chandelier and sends a slice of light across glass and faces. For a heartbeat, no one thinks of the engagement speeches or the contracts about to be announced. They think only of the thing that should not be there. "Stop her," someone hisses, an assistant, a flashed badge, a voice that means power. A woman in a satin gown, the intended fiancée, begins to look around as if a fly has landed on her shoulder. Cameras pivot. The Chiron brothers, Lucas, Logan, and Lion, sit in a cluster like judges, cool as carved stone. Their eyes lift. A sound like a gavel bangs through the room where none exists. Recognition, like a chord struck in someone's memory. "Where did you get that?" Lucas asks, the syllables soft but heavy. Lina turns. A security guard towers like a wall in front of her. Faces close. Heat and perfume and whispered accusations. She hears the word imposter before she hears the question. "Just be thorough," she tells him, a command passed off as concern. Lina feels the room tighten like a fist around her. Security's hand is on her elbow now, not unkind, but absolute. Cameras swarm. Someone records everything, as if the recording itself were a judge that can be trusted when people are not. Lina's heart knocks under her ribs. She remembers something, an old woman with knitting needles and a story about a necklace that she only heard once in a grocery queue and then dismissed. The scent of lavender. Childhood flickers like a cheap film in her mind. She has no right to be part of this story, but the necklace seems to hum beneath the fabric of her jacket like an invitation. "Let her speak," Alfred says from the doorway. No one notices Alfred at first. He is small and stooped, an older man in a coat that has seen a dozen winters. He walks with the deliberate slowness of someone who remembers 1,000 doorways and locks. He is the Chiron family's long-serving caretaker, the one who knows where the spare keys sleep and who carries the allergies to the old estate like a badge. He hasn't been asked to the city suite in years, yet he stands at the edge of the ballroom with a face that is not surprised. "What do you know, Alfred?" Lucas asks, and the word carries both a rebuke and a plea. Alfred's eyes find Lina's. In them, there is the flash of recognition that needs no words. He takes a step forward, and the room inhales with him. That pendant, he says, voice rough as old stone, was never meant to be on a stage. No artifacts, Logan says, sharply, not tonight. Alfred shakes his head. Not an artifact, a mark, a seal. It was used to call a blood's attention. It has to be handled. Handled how? Vivian cuts in, the impatience of privilege riding on the edge of her smile. Alfred looks at Lina, then at the pendant, then back to Lina again. If it's genuine, he says, with the careful patience of a man who has seen too many people try to be other than they are, it calls, it shows, but it can't be trusted by sight alone. A journalist in a sequined dress whispers into her phone. A municipal reporter takes notes as if legality is a coat you can put on and the exposure of its seams matters. In minutes, the word spreads, a claim, a pendant, a lost Cheyenne. In minutes, the room rearranges itself around the new possibility. A lost heiress is always a story of ruin or restoration, and both sell newspapers. Is she the heir? Someone asks. She could be, Lucas says, but he sounds as if he's tasting a foreign food for the first time, tempted but calculating. Chaos follows the word like punctuation. The fiancée stands in the center with her face white as paper. Michael's carelessness becomes a blade in his hand. His smile becomes a strategy. Vivian's body leans closer still, as if she can become a part of whatever gravity this new name holds. Lina's voice is steady in a way that surprises even herself. "I don't know anything about that family," she says. "I don't." "Then where did you get the pendant?" Logan demands. The room wants a story it can photograph. Lina swallows. "I found it in a box, at the warehouse, an order mixed up." She imagines the warehouse, a sea of crates with labels like futures and decency, and the kind of paperwork that never looks at you when you need it to. "I wasn't meant to come in. I shouldn't be here." "You shouldn't be here," a woman nearby repeats softly, as if memorizing history. "And yet you are." Lina thinks of the sachet's seam and the worn velvet and of a small envelope sewn inside. The seam had been torn by a thumb. She thinks of the way someone slips a thing into a pocket and never expects to be the thing's meaning. How is it that something so small can tilt a room? Lucas clears his throat, and the room obliges, tightening its attention into a single point. "We are Cheyenne," he says. "We have protocols. This family does not leave things to rumor. We will conduct the verification here and now, for the record." "It's theater," someone mutters. "Don't make this a spectacle." But the brothers have always known how to make life into theater, how to transform truth into a performance, and then claim to be the only ones who saw the script. They order the devices. A fingerprint card is placed between lacquered palms, its blue pad blinking like an eye. A small team from the estate's private security arrives, their earpieces whispering orders, their faces blank as bank statements. A silver box is brought from a courier with the reverence of a cathedral. The brothers exchange looks like signatures. Someone lifts Michael to the center again. His smile reasserts itself like a brand. Cameras turn and catch the moment when a man reveals himself not simply by his actions, but by the way he expects the world to bend. Outside, through high windows, the city is a smear of lights. Inside, history is about to be negotiated in real time. A flash of movement, and the fiancé's hand finds Michael's sleeve. "We should not," she begins, but he does not hear her. He is looking toward Vivian, toward the pendant that might make or break the evening. He ticks his jaw like a man listening to a distant ledger. And then, in 3 small seconds that will replay in 1,000 feeds, he turns away. Vivian slides a hand into the crook of his arm, as if she were a shadow he could attach to the public. Michael breathes, and it is like release dressed as courage. He leans into her, speaks something that might be a joke, and the crowd misreads the intimacy for being a part of his charm. The fiancé stands there, open-mouthed, and the engagement balloons of expectation pop like soap bubbles. Reporters smell blood, and the room splits into parts. Those who are curious, those who are greedy, those who are concerned for dignity, those who only care for spectacle. He doesn't exactly run off the dais. He walks, and those inches are the distance of 1,000 decisions. Behind him, the fiancé's eyes burn. Vivian's lips curve with a victory that feels old at the roots. The brothers watch without moving, and in their stillness, the first plan starts to unfurl in thin, rational lines. It appears the evening has taken an unexpected turn, Lucas says calmly, and his voice is oil on water. We should proceed with the verification before rumors outrun facts. Please, Vivian's voice is honey, if there's any doubt, we need to close it now. The room leans toward the scent of judgment. An assistant ushers Lina into a side room, not badly, but with the cold professional courtesy of someone moving a fragile object from sunlight to shadow. Hands check her pockets, not roughly, but with the practiced disengagement of people who do this for a living. Someone hands her a glass of water, as if the world might be kind if it was at least offered some ritual. Lina's fingers curl around the pendant through the cloth, and for a moment, there is the old, warm smell of something like hope. Alone, she presses a thumb to the velvet pouch and feels the hard edge of the pendant. She thinks of the warehouse again, of the box with the wrong address, of the seam that let her keep a secret like a hot coal. She thinks of the streetlights on her childhood apartment, of a mother who once told her that everyone has a place where they're supposed to be. She didn't know she was supposed to be anywhere near the Chiron crest. Back on the floor, technicians unbox instruments that hum with precision. A fingerprint coffer, whose surface is warm from someone else's fingerprints, sits like a judge under glass. A UV lamp is rigged on a stand, the beam slicing a corridor of blue that will reveal marks meant to be hidden from the naked eye. Someone mentions a DNA protocol in a low voice, and the word lands like a stone in a pond. The suggestion of extraction, of chemistry and evidence and unarguable numbers reassures the wealthy, because technique is the last refuge of certainty. Chain of custody, one of the private security officers says. We can't let anything leave without oversight. That means we document every touch. Vivian's smile thins when she hears that. Michael's jaw tightens. He did not expect his love to be so bureaucratic. She was meant to be his when everyone could see it, not when the world was busy asking for proof. Photos are taken of Lina's hands, of the pendant glinting against her palm. The device blinks when a security guard places it on the glass. It accepts the pendant as if offering it a seat at a table. A technician murmurs into her earpiece. Phones are out, people record, and the room is a chorus of little personal witnesses with their own agendas. I'll need a swab for DNA, one technician announces, into the small room where Lina now stands, and the words ricochet. DNA. Possible counterfeit, the technician intones, and the Brighton reporters begin to warm their cameras like a hearth for flames. Lina's throat closes. A wave of humiliation rises. Voices in the room tilt like vultures circling a wounded story. Michael watches as if waiting to see which way the drama's wind will blow before deciding whether to bask or to hide. Not so fast, Alfred says, steady as a stone in a river. Smudges can mean repair. Repairs can mean it's old. Old can mean it's genuine. We don't throw a girl out because of a crooked file. Then let's prove it, Lucas says. This isn't a tavern brawl. We have methods. If she is who she says she might be, the family has procedures. If not, we'll have to consider how this pendant found its way here, Logan says. The words are a threat and a puzzle at once. Who benefits if an heir is planted on the floor of our celebration? Vivian smiles at that, slow and predatory. She has never needed to lift a hand to do harm. She has seen advantage and assumed it like a perfume. The chain of custody becomes a medieval procession. The pendant is logged, catalogued, photographed from angles that would embarrass a starlet. The velvet sachet is put into an evidence bag. The fingerprint card is wiped, then reran, the blue pad blinking like a sleepy animal roused. Technicians triple-check certificates that guarantee nothing to anyone except that they are thorough. Meanwhile, rumors grow teeth. Someone suggests it was a planted stunt to gain publicity. Someone else suggests it was orchestrated by rival board members to destabilize Michael before the merger vote. A soft, conspiratorial voice asks whether the pendant was planted to ruin Vivian, to force Michael to choose under the glare. Vivian smiles at that, slow and predatory. She has never needed to lift a hand to do harm. She has seen advantage and assumed it like a perfume. The chain of custody becomes a medieval procession. The pendant is logged, catalogued, photographed from angles that would embarrass a starlet. The velvet sachet is put into an evidence bag. The fingerprint card is wiped, then reran, the blue pad blinking like a sleepy animal roused. Technicians triple-check certificates that guarantee nothing to anyone except that they are thorough. Meanwhile, rumors grow teeth. Someone suggests it was a planted stunt to gain publicity. Someone else suggests it was orchestrated by rival board members to destabilize Michael before the merger vote. A soft, conspiratorial voice asks whether the pendant was planted to ruin Vivian, to force Michael to choose under the glare. Lina stands in the center of rotating attention like a coin being held up to a lamp. She remembers the seam of the velvet she opened, a little folded paper tucked inside, with a line of printing she had not read before because she thought it was just an inventory slip. But memory is unreliable. The warehouse manager is called on the phone, and his voice is small. He stammers, says it could have been a mislabel, says she shouldn't have the pendant, says the delivery manifest shows a different route. He offers, as so many people do, the protection of a professional shrug. "You expect me to believe that you simply found the family symbol in an order?" one tabloider asks, leaning in with a microphone. "Were you trying to get attention?" Lina looks at him like a suddenly uninterested child. "No, I was doing my job." But the world will not let it stay that simple. It can't. Not here. The Sharon name is a tapestry of rumor and law, and the public enjoys the rip when the thread is pulled. Time moves in two speeds, fast for the cameras, measured for the legal minds. The brothers agree to a formal sequence. Fingerprint first, ultraviolet next, DNA if required, and a final family ritual. Old and symbolic, but with a legalistic twist that placates both the superstitious and the skeptical. "This will be done properly," Lucas announces. "No theatrics, no outside interference. We will follow a state protocol. You will be given representation." "No," Lina says quickly, startling everyone. The word comes like a reflex. Vivian's smile sharpens. "You don't want representation?" she asks, the mockery thinly hidden. Alfred meets Lina's eyes. "What do you want?" he asks. Lina inhales the room. She thinks of wages and rent and a mother who once told her to be careful when angels smiled too loudly. She thinks of the velvet and the small paper tucked inside, the seam that told her that someone had intentionally hidden something on purpose. She thinks of the dirt road back where she used to watch a church bell strike noon and pretend it meant the rest of her life would be different. She looks at Alfred and then at Vivian, And here's the word bought echo. I want the truth, she says simply. It is not a plea and not entirely a strategy. It is a sentence that feels like a promise and a warning at the same time. The first CTA arrives then, not the internet kind, but the other. A shout from the mezzanine where someone with a lifeline to the public yells, "If you want to know what happens next, stay with us." It's perfunctory, corporate, a moment where entertainment notes that it has an audience. But it is also necessary. The evening will be watched, and decisions will be made on the basis of attention. For once, Lina finds herself oddly grateful for that human appetite. They carry on with the fingerprint reading. The device hums and runs. A technician frowns as the screen churns through records. The guests breathe in a synchronized way. Someone in the back of the room leaks coffee onto a program and swears that it's an omen. Security watches with the rapt devotion of men who anticipate a paycheck. There's no match, the technician says finally, and in the silence that follows the words, the room tries to find an equilibrium. A match would have been a crown. No match is a cudgel. But Lucas raises a hand to forestall conclusion. Preliminary, he says. We have limited access to older estate fingerprints on this network. Get the private archive and run it. Now. The private archive will take time. The room rearranges its timeline. Cameras stay. The fiancé weeps quietly into a program. Vivian moves like a predator, her smile the kind that has teeth. Michael stands in an eddy of decision, watching which way the currents might carry him. Lina is moved to a small holding room where the echo of the ballroom is a faraway sound. A security officer is polite enough to offer a chair. Alfred sits across from her, and for a moment, the two people who stand furthest from the city's power sit like conspirators. You kept it, Alfred says. It does not sound like accusation, but more like astonishment. Why? Lina grins, briefly, not because the situation is funny, but because she recognizes the absurdity of its scale. I thought it was part of the flowers, she says. It fit with the ribbon. I didn't want to carry extra up front. And the paper? He lifts his fingers as if to hold an invisible thread. Did you see a slip? Yes, a number. She remembers the digits, blurred by shipping ink, a stenciled label, S 1983. I thought it was an inventory code. Alfred presses his lips together. S 1983, he repeats softly. I haven't seen records like that in years. If it's what I think, then someone moved old stock without telling the house. That is dangerous. Dangerous for whom? Lina asks. For anyone who thinks they can hold the truth in a glove and not expect it to leave a smudge, Alfred replies. Outside, the technicians work like surgeons. Fingerprint files are pried from cold archives. An ultraviolet lamp shows a pattern that could be repaired, and that could be genuine, and that could be a clever forgery. Someone in the legal team whispers about chain of title and escrow lists, and how shares can be blocked with a single signed paper held in trust. The word black card surfaces in one of those whispers, an instrument of power, equal parts myth and fact in high finance, a bundle of pre-signed privileges that acts as a placeholder for wealth in limbo. The room imagines it like a dagger hidden in a velvet sheath, small, heavy, capable of shifting everything. Lina listens and learns that the Chiron family uses such instruments to mobilize assets rapidly in emergencies. Sealed transfers that require multiple keys, a legal ballet with witnesses and signatures. She thinks of her own life with a new, strange mapping. How a single paper could change the arc of a lifetime. How a signature could be a door left open or slammed shut. Her throat tightens. A phone rings in the holding room and she answers. It's the warehouse manager, nervously recanting the chain of custody. He admits to a mislabeling mix and to a recent shipment error. He says someone pulled stock to the city with no authorized note. He stammers, offers to travel to the estate. I didn't know, he says, and then apologizes as if apology could stitch a seam in time. Vivian announces to one of the magazine editors that she knows people who can interpret the marks. Michael's presence at her side grows like a prop, protective in a way that is performative and dangerous. He thinks he is playing both sides, public lover, private dealmaker, because he believes men like him can walk between loyalties without getting cut. But there are knives in this world too, thin, legal, and patient. The brothers convene a private council in a corner. They calculate the risk of letting the rumor breathe longer versus the benefit of an immediate disclosure. The technicians promise more time. The ultraviolet lamp throws blue light like a question, and the fingerprint device blinks like a blinking eye. They decide to proceed with the private archive run and to postpone the ritual until after the board convenes. Legal clarity first, pageantry later. The board convenes, lawyers move, and Lina is told she will be kept under watch until everything is sorted. It is phrased with courtesy, but the hand is firm. Alfred, Lucas says, as the older man prepares to leave the holding room, if you recall anything, nothing is insignificant. Alfred nods, and for a sliver of an instant, his face is something like regret. He steps back into the ballroom where the world is louder than a flipped coin. Lina is escorted through a corridor that smells of linen and cold polish. She passes mirrors where her reflection looks like a different person under the house lights. She thinks of the small paper again, the digits that meant nothing until tonight. She thinks, too, of the black card whisper she overheard, and of the sealed documents that move like ghosts through the wealthier rooms of the world. When they place her in a small private anteroom, someone dares to ask if she has any legal counsel. She shakes her head and thinks about how legal counsel costs a life. Alfred sits beside her as if he has nowhere else to be. She pulls the velvet pouch closer and, as if remembering something she hasn't yet allowed herself to claim, she lifts the hem and finds another thin fold of paper pressed into the seam. Her fingers shake when she opens it. Inside is a small, aged note, typed with the kind of machine that makes letters like small, stubborn teeth. It reads, in a handwriting not unlike that of a clerk who never expected to be read, "If found, return to Sharon House, Trust Folder S1983. No transfer without 2 keys." There is a stamp, an official circle that could belong to a bank or to a household ledger. Her breath comes shallow. The note is small. It is also proof that somewhere in the estate architecture there is a thing named S1983, a secret labeled, cataloged, and intended for recovery. It could be a paper trail, it could be a sealed instrument, it could also be nothing. But someone had tucked it into a velvet pouch and then into a delivery that took a wrong turn. Alfred's face goes pale in a new way, as if a memory has been dredged up from the bottom of an old pond. S1983, he repeats, and now the repetition is a drumbeat. That folder was created when the elder's twin disappeared. It hasn't been opened in 30 years. Opened by who? Lina asks. The words come out fast, carved with the kind of curiosity that can be dangerous. Alfred leans in and whispers, like a conspirator who has kept a secret out of respect rather than selfishness. By trustees, by those who had the authority. It contains certain transfers, emergency instruments. It was sealed under measures that could move ownership if certain conditions were met. No one expected those conditions to be anything but legend. Lina feels, in that small chamber, as if she stands at the edge of a sea she has been told never to cross. The note in her hand is small and dangerous. It is a key without a lock. It is a whisper in a room full of people who could or could not listen. She knows one thing with a clarity that has nothing to do with wealth or spectacle. She will not let someone else decide the story of what that note means. She is, in her bones, someone who has always had to take small actions to survive. She folds the paper and presses it back into the seam, not out of fear, but because she understands the value of quiet. Proof, she thinks, is a thing that should be held until the moment you can use it without shame. Outside, the ballroom continues. Music, laughter, veiled malice. The cameras have not left. They rest on the periphery like hungry animals. People taste the scandal the way they taste a wine, savoring its edges, not caring how it affects the glass. Inside the private room, Lina breathes with Alfred beside her. He looks like someone who has seen too many fires and knows the smell of what remains. If S1983 is what I think, he says softly, then you don't just have a pendant, you might have a lever. A lever, Lina repeats, and the word sounds both mechanical and holy. A legal lever, Alfred corrects, a way to assert claim, not by spectacle, but by document. Elders can and did leave instruments that moved property in emergencies. They made sure there was a path for the rightful heir, but they also made sure the path had checks, 2 keys, witnesses, a board motion. It wasn't meant to be easy. Lina presses the velvet to her chest and considers the syllables of possibility. A lever, a paper that could switch the axis of fate. She had never imagined such a thing could be inside a sack meant for roses. "But I'm a maid," she whispers. The title sits on her like a garment that doesn't fit. "You are more than that," Alfred says. "You have always been more than that. Sometimes the world just apologizes late." They are interrupted by the sound of a door opening and the entrance of one of the board lawyers, who carries a folder the size of authority. They will talk in measured terms now: chain of custody, retainer, representation. Lawyers use words like scalpel blades and tend to cut the same way, each time. The lawyer recommends a neutral counsel and a delay so the board can consult with outside counsel. The brothers nod. This is, to them, the careful folding of risk. Outside, in the ballroom, a screaming headline begins to write itself, less about the pendant than about the man who chose a lover at the altar. Michael, who had thought he could navigate the night with charm and options, realizes the optics are now something else. He checks his phone and sees the feeds expanding like a web. He sees his face between gossip and law. Vivian squeezes his hand, and he squeezes back, but the squeeze is not equal to the scale of what has been set in motion. Down the corridor, Lina folds her fingers around the velvet pouch and thinks of the paper tucked into the seam. For the first time tonight, she feels something like a choice. No one will hand her counsel for free. No one will offer her a title. She will have to take the next steps like everything else in her life, small, stubborn, and under a pressure that could crush or refine her. The board calls for a private vote to decide the official procedure. Security locks the back exits. Cameras are corralled into media rooms. The city watches. For Lina, the room that holds her is both a refuge and a holding cell. She is told that formal questioning will happen in the morning. She is told nothing about what might be revealed in the private archives. Alfred squeezes her hand and then stands. "Rest," he says. "I'm going to fetch what I can from the old records. Not everything can be shared yet, but some things can be verified." "Will you really?" Lina asks. He meets her eyes with a steadiness that has the weight of something older than scandal. "If you are the girl I think you might be," he says, "then you deserve a hearing that isn't a spectacle." Lina lies on the small couch and lets the velvet rest against her chest. The pendant hums like a The pendant hums like a secret waiting to be spoken, a low vibration under the velvet that makes Lina imagine distant thunder. She closes her eyes and lets the sound slow her breath the way she used to when a storm passed over the block and her mother sang to make the windows stop rattling. For a moment, the room is only cloth and metal and the odd comfort a worn thing can give. Alfred goes out into the night with a list of names and memories folded behind his ribs. He moves through the estate's corridors like a man carrying an unlighted candle toward a room of matches. The private archive is a place he has not entered in years. Dirt settled into its corners like old gossip. The keys feel heavier than brass in his palm. They are agreements, deadlines, and promises all stamped into cold metal. He finds the old ledger, the box stamped S 1983, and lifts a lid that smells of paper and dust and other people's truths. Inside the folder are instruments and notices, a brittle will amendment written in a hand that trembled with age, a series of trustee directives, and a sealed, pre-signed transfer instrument with the Shiren crest pressed into its corner. Someone had prepared a mechanism for emergency succession, an instrument that would mobilize shares and grant power if the rightful heir surfaced and met the house's conditions. The document reads like a legal prayer: no transfer without 2 keys. Trustees to confirm veracity by biometric and documentary means. Board approval required. It is careful, bureaucratic, immovable. It is, in other words, a door that opens only by procedure. Alfred takes a photograph with his phone, one small, trembling picture of a signature he remembers from an old portrait, and then puts everything back as if nothing has happened. He knows secrecy is a tool, discretion is often justice. He leaves a note for Lina in the room where she sits, short, direct, the kind of message a man gives when he is certain the woman he writes to will understand its gravity, and then returns to the ballroom to find the taste of rumor has turned metallic in everyone's mouths. Morning arrives with reporters like a tide. The private archive consults the estate's lawyers. Lina is moved into a neutral office with windows that look at a courtyard and a murmuring fountain that makes the world seem less sharp. A lawyer with kind eyes but a wallet's instincts sits down across from her to explain rights and options in precise, cushioned language. Lina listens, measuring each word against what she has always known about survival, that promises without signatures are poetry, useful in some rooms but worthless in others. They run the fingerprint archives again, with access to the estate's private logs unlocked by the board's provisional authorization. The private lab contracted by the Shirens pulls records from vaults older than many of the guests. Their machines hum, the screens whisper numbers. The first result comes back ambivalent, no definitive match in the public registry, but the private archives show fingerprints that have been sealed and unindexed for decades. They will require DNA to close the loop. A technician emails a preliminary readout. Someone in the room displays it as proof of diligence. When the file is printed, a line on the page is redacted, an obvious, heavy black bar. Someone leans forward and squints at it. In a city that thrives on exposure, a redaction is a rumor given clothes. The brothers decide to keep the room's ritual for later and move forward with what they can legally secure now: board votes, temporary guardianship of the contested assets, and an agreement to block transfers until verification is complete. Vivian, meanwhile, has not been idle. She drinks the early attention like a tonic, her face practiced into expressions that suggest gentleness when she needs to appear moral and steel when she must be corporate. Michael plays the role he thinks he has always played: cool, measured, hanging like a shadow around her shoulders. He signs his name on preliminary papers that will secure his immediate influence should the transfer go Vivian's way. He thinks, wrongly, that a signature now will be the courtesy of a man who knows how to insure himself. The press spins 1,000 versions of tonight's events. Some call it drama, others call it scandal. Talk shows debate whether Michael deserted a wedding or found himself free. Viral clips of him leaning into Vivian circulate with commentators offering moral charts and stock advice in the same breath. The story becomes a commodity, and every commodity has buyers. By mid-afternoon, a door opens in Lina's office, and a young woman steps in. She-arranged hair, blazer ironed, a badge that indicates she works for a lab contracted to the family. She is the technician who collected Lina's swab. She sits like a small animal, and then breathes as if releasing a held breath. "I need to say something," she tells Lina without preface. Lina looks at her for a long heartbeat, and then nods. She is tired of the world making decisions about her in rooms she could not enter. "Say it," she answers simply. The technician's hands fidget. "I wasn't supposed to alter anything," she says, "but there was pressure. They wanted a quick result for the board. They gave me a file and asked me to—" She stops, swallowing. "They offered money. They said if the report was clean for the family's interest, we'd all be taken care of." Lina's eyes narrow. The room is suddenly thinner for the lie in the air. Who made the offer? "One of the executives through someone in security," the technician says. "He texted the lab manager. He wanted us to make a preliminary read. We were supposed to see a non-match, then close the question while the trust was managed. I refused at first. She blinks hard. Then I did a preliminary print and marked it as a test. I didn't change anything irreversible. I documented it, but I was scared." "Why tell me?" Lina asks. "Because he threatened to cut me loose if I didn't play along. Because I couldn't sleep. Because when you walked away from the stage yesterday, you looked like someone who had to hold everything inside and might break. I'm tired of carrying things into people like you." The technician squeezes a hand into a fist. "And because the printed report, it was altered. Someone took a clean sheet and stamped no match on it because it suited them." This admission is a fuse in a room full of dry paper. Lina's skin prickles. She calls Alfred into the office, and together they befriend the truth in that cramped space. They bring the technician's testimony to a law firm attorney on retainer for the estate, one who had protested privately but had been muted by the brothers' insistence that the matter be kept within family counsel. He listens, then tells them, quietly and with a lawyer's calm, that what has been done could be criminal: tampering with evidence, bribery, falsification. He adds, with a clinical edge, that it also gives Lina a leverage she did not have yesterday: evidence of interference in the verification process. "You understand what a single proven act of tampering will do," he says. "If we can show the chain of custody was broken, if we can show the sample handling was compromised, then every contrived conclusion they've celebrated becomes suspect." That night, the city lights seem to hold their breath. The brothers convene and then splinter into private conversations like fissures forming under a heavy load. Logan mutters about optics. Lucas speaks of precedent. Leon, the youngest, flicks through emails on a tablet like a man looking for a loose string to pull. Vivian paces private corridors and arranges her face into expressions she hopes will survive exposure. Michael grows quieter, less certain of the terrain he thought he'd mapped. On the third day, the tabloids run a headline that is half accusation and half invitation. Did someone buy a verdict? Conservative papers decry the spectacle. Gossip outlets live feed the legalese like it is a game show. Stock analysts begin to talk about the Chiron shares as if their futures were solely about human drama. The family, once a sealed vault, now finds its hinges exposed. Then, in a small administrative office 3 floors down, Alfred unrolls a microfilm reel he discovered tucked behind the ledger. He watches it on a tiny screen, a scene from decades prior, a younger matriarch speaking into a camera, a ceremony half ritual, half protocol. Her voice is brittle but clear. She speaks of contingencies, of instruments to channel power should bloodlines be interrupted, of a black card, a legal instrument, not a card of plastic and swagger, that would serve as a bearer of special authority when paired with the right triggers. She points, in the video, to a sealed folder labeled S1983 and mentions keys that must be used by trustees. Alfred's hands shake. He brings the reel to Lina and the attorney. They watch the matriarch's image and the old woman's words like someone watching a map of a land they had only heard about in parable. The matriarch's voice, thin like a reed, says, "We cannot leave an empire to rumor. We give it doors. We lock those doors so only blood and right and law may open them." The presence of this filmed declaration changes the game. It proves that S1983 is more than legend. It is an institutionalized mechanism, the family hedging against disappearance and fraud by making succession procedural and verifiable. The attorney writes, then speaks. If this reel authenticates S1983 as part of a state protocol, then the family is legally bound to follow the document's instructions. And if procedures were violated in the verification, then any conclusion made on that basis could be void. They need a public forum, an indisputable stage where the trust's rules can be understood by market regulators, by press, and by the bank trustees who still hold signatures in dead ink. The board calls an emergency meeting. Cameras are admitted under strict terms. Lawyers for the board, for Lina, and for outside trust entities sit around a table with tablets that burn with information. A representative from the bank that holds the black card, mysterious, almost mythic in the eyes of lunchtime columnists, arrives in a suit that speaks of continuity. He carries a sealed envelope and a ledger the size of a volume of law. His presence is like a judge entering a room. Gravity settles. They request the instruments. The black card is produced, not glossy and flamboyant, but a small ledger of coated paper and a thin metal plate, its symbolism greater than its substance. The bankman speaks of escrow and of triggers. The card is administratively potent only when an heir is confirmed and an authorized motion is passed. He cannot release assets without 2 trustee confirmations and a valid identification. Paper cannot be bullied by charm, it demands signatures. Lina places the velvet pouch on the table and removes the small paper she found sewn into the seam. She lays it beside the ledger like an offering. Alfred and the lab technician provide affidavits. The technician gives a sworn deposition about the attempted tampering. A security guard, who had been paid by an intermediary to plant doubt, concedes to a recorded interview that he was coaxed into misplacing a sample. Under their combined testimony, the earlier no match becomes brittle. Then, the board's lawyers call up the DNA lab's raw files to an auditor's oversight. A second, independent lab, contracted by the attorney representing neutral trustees, runs its own tests on the swab reserved in a sealed envelope. Its technicians are watched by both parties. The procedure has layers of oversight: camera logs, time-stamped seals, and lawyers who will not let the chain of custody fray. The results arrive like a tide. The independent lab reports a match between Lina's DNA and a partial genotype preserved in the estate's closed archive, an old sample taken from the matriarch's jewelry case decades ago, now rediscovered and authenticated by archivists. It is technical language, the sort of sentence that should be boring but feels godlike in the way it names truth. Consistent with direct dissent, the report states, a phrase that lands in the room like a verdict. Vivian's composure cracks like fine porcelain. Michael's hand reaches for his phone and then drops it without having tapped it, as if the call he wanted to make is suddenly dishonest. The brothers are silent, and in their silence, there is an arithmetic of loss and gain. The bank man clears his throat and explains the mechanics. With verified dissent and the presentation of S1983's instruments, trustees are empowered to initiate a transfer contingent upon board motion. The black card, the ledger, the sealed transfer, they are not myths but contractual instruments that demand procedure. In a moment that will be replayed in smaller rooms and on morning shows, the board votes. Cameras record the motion. The vote is formal, careful, measured to avoid the appearance of spectacle. Some board members abstain. Others, who had benefited from the rumor of succession, now find their own positions precarious. Legal counsel for the estate recommends restraint. The transfer should ensure the family's legacy, not be a vehicle for vendetta. Lina nods. She has no desire to be cruel. She only wants justice and a certainty that the next child who enters the estate will not be passed through rumor's sieve. But not everyone accepts defeat gracefully. A group of executives, those who had profited in recent contracts and who had spoken in favor of an expedient solution, try to petition for emergency authority. They claim the peril of market instability and argue, shrewdly, brazenly, that the firm needs a controlled narrative. Hearing them speak, Lina feels a boxy anger. It is the anger of someone who has had to accept tiny humiliations and label them survival. It is not a riotous anger, but a precise, quiet rage that will be used like a scalpel. Then the whistleblower technician steps forward again. She gives names. She provides texts. She shows a recorded call where an intermediary suggests how a clean report could be purchased. They hand the call to prosecutors. Within 24 hours, a small legal action is filed, an inquiry, not yet a trial, but enough to freeze the most reckless of the executives and to make investors wary of any sudden transfers. The tide the executives hoped to surf begins to recede. The final public stage is the ritual the family heralded as both legend and safety valve. The brothers insist on it still. Inspection through the old family protocol, performed with modern oversight. It is not mystical. The ritual uses a century-old seal outfitted with sensor plates and a small chemical tray that traces protein markers, a hybrid of tradition and forensic technique created when the old family first modernized its security. In the right hands, it is a ceremonial device. In the right laboratory, it is a biometric check. It is handled like a sacred instrument, and tonight, like evidence. They bring the device into the room. Technicians in lab coats verify its calibration. Cameras are on. Lawyers are present. The matriarch's old reel plays in the background, a reminder that institutions are built by hands that knew how to bend law into a hedge. The device requires a small blood sample, nothing cruel, a pinprick, performed under counsel. Lina considers this for a moment and then consents. She will give what it asks because she is tired of other people deciding where she belongs. The device glows and hums when her sample is applied. A sensor plate reads the chemistry and compares it to a preserved standard from the archive. The result is a display of light, a green ring, a radiator-like bloom that moves from the center and settles into the crest. The technician looks and then smiles, the first genuine smile of the week. Verified, she says, and the word lands like a bell. Media feeds break with the headline, Air Verified. Vivian stands trembling. Michael's face is a storm cloud. The brothers speak in tones that try to be philosophical about duty, but their eyes betray realignment, some with resignation, some with calculation. The bankman rises and performs the formalities: trustee confirmation, notarized signatures, countersignatures. The black card's ledger is opened, and the pre-signed transfer instrument, triggered by authenticated verification and a board motion, is enacted. But the law is slow and considerate. It does not hand over an empire on a word. It hands over documentation. A majority share transfer in escrow now released, trustee roles revised, a seat on the board conferred. Lina receives legal papers that feel like armor and not a crown, responsible weight placed onto shoulders that had been used to lug crates and sweep floors. Her name appears in formal type where once only rumor had whispered it. The public humiliation that had been directed at Lina is reversed, not with scorn, but with the clear, blunt tool of documentation. The people who had lined up to mock her find their stories cut by signatures. Michael, who had hoped to secure influence, is now photographed with a loser's kind of dignity. His relationship to Vivian an appendage to the real story, the redistributive mechanics of a family at a crossroad. Vivian tries to make one last play. She meets with an executive known for damage control and suggests a negotiated settlement. She implies favor in return for quiet. The executive, whose name will later be associated with the attempt to alter lab reports, finds himself under renewed scrutiny. The press turns on him, and the evidence of his machinations, bank messages, security logs, are another small set of weights in the scale. He is suspended pending investigation. The company's share price wobbles and then steadies as investors read the contract pages and see the care with which the transfer is arranged. The market respects law more than rumor. In the days that follow, Lina sits in board meetings. She learns the language of fiduciary duty and how to tether compassion to policy. She listens to advisors and refuses contempt. She does not use this power like a hammer. She cancels an operating agreement that would have closed several community programs the estate subsidized when those agreements are obviously predatory. She reassigns some contracts to companies that employ local workers. These are small revolutions, practical and immediate, things that fix the small leaks of a system that had been economically corrosive to people like her. There are also consequences for the men who tried to buy truth. Charges are filed by the state for tampering with evidence and for bribery. They will argue later in court, and citations will be thrown at them like pebbles. Some will be fined, some will lose their positions. The brothers are not all punished. They walk a careful line between legacy and culpability, and their reputations reconfigure like a city finding new names for neighborhoods. Some relationships fracture for good. Michael and Vivian's romance, now seared onto morning shows, ends in a televised apology that feels less apology than the self-preservation of two people learning the cost of impropriety. Through all of this, Lina remains quiet when the cameras point at her. Fame is one thing. Being asked to perform anguish on schedule is another. She goes to the warehouse where she once worked and brings a check large enough to clear the debts of several families who are still keeping the lights on by working overtime. She sets up a fund for employees who will be displaced by automation, insisting that dignity matters as much as efficiency. Her gestures are practical and modest, the kind of decisions that reveal a leader who knows how the world looks from below. One evening, Alfred comes to her office with 2 mugs of tea and places one on the table. He watches her sign a letter redirecting maintenance budgets toward staff upgrades. There is satisfaction in his face, not triumph, but something older, the quiet contentment of a man who watched a seed find soil. "You did not become the kind of heiress they wrote about," he says mildly. "You became someone who remembers what it is to be cared for." Lina smiles, a small upturn that is not for the cameras. "I did not come here to buy a house," she replies. "I came to make sure the house remembers what it cost to be built." They walk through the estate's gardens that evening, past trimmed hedges and lanterns that glow like patient eyes. Lina keeps the pendant, but wears it now not as a talisman of claim, but as a remembrance of the seam that brought her here, A small folded paper, a wrong delivery, a series of choices that made a life pivot. The black card remains under careful watch in the bank's vault, its power now mediated by trustees who respect process and by a woman who refuses to bathe in symbolism. On a rainy morning months later, the Chiron board reconvenes to pass an initiative Lina proposed, a community trust to provide training and micro-grants to small businesses in neighborhoods that had once been overlooked by the family's philanthropy. The motion passes with a surprising unanimity. It is not a theatrical scene. It is a table of signatures and a plan to redirect money that had once been used for tax shelters into streets and classrooms. The brothers sign, some do it with grace that has been taught by necessity. Vivian attempts to rebuild a life out of the rubble of optics and finds, as many do, that reinvention requires humility and the skill of starting over. Michael retreats from public life. The tabloids eventually find new prey. The executives who tampered with the truth face consequences, and so, in their own private ways, reckon with the cost of ease. The world notices, for a while, the unlikely arc. A delivery girl becomes the legal pivot of a dynasty. Opinion pieces ponder the romance of truth. Pundits ask if the spectacle was necessary. Lina avoids grand pronouncements. She prefers lists and memos and the small satisfaction of a budget balanced in favor of people left behind. On the one-year anniversary of the banquet, Lina returns to the ballroom where it all began. The chandeliers are newly cleaned, the banners restored, but the crest looks the same as ever, 3 crescents threading into one another like a family that will always be complicated. She walks slowly across the marble, not to reclaim a stage, but to stand where history had once been made without her consent. Cameras are present, of course. Reporters ask the questions they always ask now. Did you ever want this? What will you change? Will you forgive? Lina responds with words that fit a woman who has learned the weight of language in business and charity. She speaks of responsibility, of listening to staff, of making room for the people whose nights had once been gutters for the wealthy's light. And the man who left at the altar, one reporter presses, as if the marriage of popular gossip and corporate intrigue still needs a punchline. Lina looks up at the crest and then at the ornate ceiling. People leave for many reasons, she says. Sometimes they run towards something. Sometimes they run from themselves. Either way, the job is to hold accountable the choices that touch other people's lives. She steps away from the microphone afterward, joining a small group from the catering team who clap when she appears. She signs a program for a child who had watched the whole affair on a parent's phone and who dreams of a future that looks less like his parents' nights. She files budgets, checks a spreadsheet that will fund a new training center, and when night falls, she keeps the pendant safe in a small box beside her bed. There are quiet moments with Alfred in which they remember the warehouse and the seam. He brings a letter one evening, an old photograph found in an attic chest, a picture of a girl sitting on a stoop with a dog, the matriarch's hand resting on a child's shoulder. The photograph is anonymous and perfect in its way, an image that says roots matter more than headlines. Lina places it beside her own mantle and thinks of the chain of small actions that stitched her life into the fabric of the estate. The scandal fades from front pages as other stories erupt, but an institutional change has been made, a procedural precedent, a trust that will be cited by lawyers for decades, a community fund that replaces a rumor with something tangible. The Chiron name will continue to be spoken aloud, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with contempt, but the way the family handles succession will now bear the weight of transparency. In the quiet of her office late at night, Lina touches the black cards ledger one last time before it goes back into the bank's vault and its careful hands. The feeling is not triumph, but a simple settling, an old door shut and not slammed. She thinks of the girl who used to refuse to be small. She thinks of the DNA swab that proved what photographs dared not. About all, she thinks of the way truth, when held by process and people committed to justice, is not simply announced on a stage, but constructed, slowly, with signatures and pauses and the stubborn bravery of those who prefer law to rumor. Some nights she dreams she is back in the warehouse, not as a worker, but as an owner of the floor itself, turning inventory slips into opportunities. She wakes with the memory of the pendant's hum, and, like someone who has kept a small light alive through storm, she lets it remind her that power is not only to be held, but to be given back. The city moves on. The banquet hall opens its doors occasionally for fundraiser dinners. People sit under the chandeliers and speak of mergers and long-term strategies. Lina sometimes attends, now as a hostess who remembers what the room once wanted to do to her and what it taught her to do instead: listen, discern, and refuse spectacle when it conflicts with the lives plugged into the building's foundation. And somewhere in the vault, the black card rests in its ledger case, a legal instrument that is no longer rumor, but an accountable mechanism. Lina does not flaunt it. She honors it. She knows its value is procedural, not mystical, and in that understanding, she finds a kind of grace. She keeps the pendant in her desk drawer still, next to the picture of the girl on a stoop, a reminder of the seam that began everything. If you stayed with the story until the truth was called and the paper signed, if you felt the tilt of the room and the small, fierce dignity that pushed back, thank you. If this kind of story intrigues you, follow along. There are always more rooms where secrets live and more small hands ready to tug their threads.